Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Rabbi I work at the shul, and we're very, very pleased to welcome Rabbi Hattin here tonight. Rabbi Michael Hattin teaches Tanakh and Halakha at the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem and coordinates the Beit Midrash for the Pardes Center for Jewish Educators. Studied for Smicha at Yeshiva Har Etzion and holds a professional degree in architecture from the University of Toronto. Rabbi Hattin is the author of Passages, Text and Transformation in the Parsha, and also Joshua, the Challenge of the Promised Land. He has served as scholar resident in communities throughout North America and Europe and lives in a lone shvut with his wife, Rivka, who's really awesome, and their 5 children. I'm sure are also really awesome. And we're so pleased to have you at
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've had the opportunity to speak in Chicago at a few different places, and it's just such a lovely, lovely place. People are very friendly. So thank you for the honor. I have to do a little pitch work first, if that's okay. Get that out of the way. I'm coming from Pardes in Yerushalayim. And at Pardes we have all sorts of programs really for any possible approach that you are interested in. We have a year program, a semester program, and a summer program, and a week program during the winter, and some other stuff. There's always something going on. If you are interested in any of our programs, I'm going to pass these sheets around. You can add your name and your email. We will not solicit you, at least not at first. Usually I write my name as the first space so people don't feel like nervous writing their name as the first person. But help yourselves if you're interested. And I also have some Pardes promotional materials up here that describe our various programs. I am not taking it back home because it's really heavy. So I invite you all to take some if you want, including our very popular Keep Calm and Study Talmud stickers. Okay? So you're welcome to take some at any time. All right, so tonight, what time do we have until? 8:30? 8:30? Okay. So tonight, we're going to be talking about a topic which I guess is familiar probably to everybody. And as much as it's familiar, I would argue that perhaps it will be helpful to get a better handle on the material. Okay? We'll be talking about Shabbat and something essential about what Shabbat is. And we'll be attempting to tease out really from the text what the essence of Shabbat might be about. Along the way, I hope, we will discover that, I'm going to argue at least, and I think it's going to be obvious by the end, that we need Shabbat now more than we've ever needed it before, for reasons that we will see. I'm going to start with a Mishnah. You have the sources in front of you. It's a Mishnah that really begins to frame the discussion maybe in a way that we haven't thought about it before, or maybe we have. The Mishnah says that there are certain things in Halakha, in Jewish practice and observance, that have an awful lot of material associated with them, textual material, but not an awful lot of primary text that can actually serve as the anchor for the material. The Mishnah says, Heter Nedarim, we're not going to go through everything here. Heter Nedarim Porchin Ba'avir, Ve'ein Lahem Al Mashi Yismochu. There's an idea that you could have an absolution from a vow. You made a vow back in the day and you want to be absolved from the vow. There's a protocol for doing so. In order to be absolved from a vow, you have to do something called Charata Mi'ikara, which means that I basically demonstrate some sort of a heartfelt regret that, as it were, uproots the vow from the beginning as if it never took place. Now the truth is that the Torah never spells out the idea of absolution from vows explicitly. Okay? And in that sense, the Mishnah says it's porech ba'avir, it's as if it's floating in the air. The idea that you could be absolved from a vow is floating in the air. Ve'ein lahem al mashi yismachu, and there is no primary text, no biblical text that can anchor that particular absolution in place. Hilchot Shabbat, which is our topic, the laws of Shabbat, Chagigot v'hami'ilot, the laws of the holiday sacrifices, the laws of trespass, i.e. misuse of temple property, Harehem kahararim hatiluyin base'ara. They are like mountains that hang by a hair. Shehein mikra mu'at v'halachot merubot. Because they involve very little primary text in the Torah and an awful lot of halachic material that constitutes the observance. Okay, so to give you an example, like back in the day, when I learned for smicha, and we learned Hilchot Shabbat, it literally took a year and a half to get through the material. But we didn't even get through it all. Because the halachic Shabbat, in terms of material, is vast. But if you go back to the primary text of the Torah, there's actually relatively little. Okay, it's like a mountain that hangs by a hair. That's what the Mishnah is picturing. There are other items. Hadinin, v'ha'avodot, ha'taharot, v'hatumot, v'arayot, yesh lehem al mashi yismachu, v'hen gufei Torah, the Talmud will edit that, hen v'hen gufei Torah. There are other things, temple sacrifice, the laws of Tuman Tahara, the laws of forbidden relations. There's lots of textual material for that. Right? So, as it were, the halakha has an awful lot of material to work with in order to construct the halachot associated with those subjects. So, for our purposes, what I want people to note or to take away from this first source is the idea that Hilchot Shabbat involve a tremendous amount of stuff and a dearth of verses in the Torah. Okay? So that's kind of our opening image. On the bottom of the first sheet is a bunch of what I call references. Okay, this is basically, it's not exhaustive. It's not every single reference to Shabbat in the Tanakh, but it's comprehensive enough. It's the majority of them. And one of the things we note, first of all, is that Shabbat is mentioned really at the very opening of the story. Call it Genesis chapter 1, 2, right? Our story, as it were, begins with Shabbat. And Shabbat is mentioned throughout the Hebrew Bible really until the final books. When we get to the book of Nehemiah, which is the end of the biblical timeline, Shabbat is mentioned again. And as you can see, it sort of punctuates the Tanakh at various locations. Okay, so it's mentioned obviously in the Chumash, and then Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Nehemiah, Tehillim. Shabbat has this power. It's so ingrained in our identity as Jews. And it begins that power in the Tanakh itself. So from the beginning to the end, Shabbat is mentioned. Okay, we keep coming across it in the story. That's, by the way, unusual. We don't hear about Kashrut ever again after we get past, well, we do actually in the book of Daniel, but it's not nearly as many references as there are to Shabbat. Okay, many other areas of halakha we hear about once or twice at a certain point in the story, and that's it. So Shabbat has a staying power. Okay? Whatever Shabbat is about, it seems to be central to the story. Every time in this list of references that you see a star next to the reference, that means that it's not a general mention of Shabbat, but a specific mention of activities associated with its observance. Okay? So, for instance, the second reference from Shemot chapter 16 is the story of the manna. And in that version of the story, Shabbat is introduced. And we're told, on the Shabbat, you must not go out to gather the manna. On the Shabbat, we do not bake or cook the manna. You have to sort of prepare ahead of time. In other words, what the starred reference means is, there is a Shabbat which is mentioned, and a particular activity which is associated with its observance, and that somehow is core to understand what Shabbat is about. Okay? If you do the math, you will discover that at most, from the biblical material, you can perhaps assemble 8 or 9, maximum 10 activities which are going to be associated with Shabbat observance. which is of course a far cry from the traditionalist, the Mishnah in Perek Shvi'i of Shabbat, 39 Melachot, right? So I'm 30 short, at least, right? We're going to have to somehow deal with that issue. Hilchot Shabbat are like a mountain which hangs by a hair. That's sort of what the rabbis are getting at, okay? When I do the math and I add up the data in the Tanakh itself, it doesn't appear to be sufficient to generate what ultimately becomes the halachic edifice of Shabbat observance. Okay, but nevertheless, we're going to give it a try. I just want to explore one or two references without going through the list because it's kind of, it's a lengthy list. The first reference to Shabbat, obviously, is in the story of creation. 6 days of creation, the seventh day is Shabbat, right?
Right.
The basic dynamic of the process of creation: chaos to order, simple to complex, inanimate to animate to sentient. That's the basic process. I'm not going to go through each day individually. And then Shabbat is introduced. And we all know the reference because we've incorporated it as part of Kiddush, Friday night Kiddush. Okay? So you may be surprised to learn that Shabbat is actually not mentioned in that source. What do I mean by that? Shabbat as a noun is not mentioned in the source. What the text says is, Kivo Shavat Mikol Melakha. This is where Dagesh makes a difference. Right? Shavat is a verb. Shabbat is a noun. Shavat is what God does. He ceases. Shabbat is the name of the institution. There is no Shabbat in Breshit Perek Bet. There's only God who is Shavat. Okay? And with that, pretty much, that reference, Shabbat disappears from the story. So the Midrash will have Abraham making Kiddush and Sarah lighting Neirot and the rest of it. But in the text itself, there is no Shabbat in Sefer Breshit. Okay, it's not mentioned again. If God were to one day write his autobiography, right, and he would say, well, let me tell you about those 6 days and everything that I did, and on the seventh day I ceased, effectively, the very first reference to Shabbat in our tradition is an event in the life of God. It has no impact on human beings. Or at least the impact on human beings is nowhere discussed. And with that, Shabbat is sort of left. Call it an abstract Shabbat, or a conceptual Shabbat, or a cosmic Shabbat. That's the Shabbat of Sefer Breshit. Okay, the next time we meet Shabbat is in the story of Bnei Israel. Right, to make a long story short, they leave Mitzrayim, and they enter the Midbar, and they're hungry, and they're thirsty, and they're kvetching. You know the story already. And God provides the man, and lo and behold, every day the man falls, and there's just enough for that day, and there's some sort of an idea in there about, obviously, reliance on God for one's sustenance. And on the sixth day, something unusual happens. What happens? Lechem Mishneh. There's twice as much. Okay, and the elders come to Moshe, and they're somewhat confused. What does Moshe say? Shabbat Hayom Hashem. Today's Shabbat, or tomorrow's going to be Shabbat. Right? So therefore, prepare ahead of time. You're getting a double measure because there won't be man on Shabbat. Now we can debate, and it's possible to see it from either direction, really. Is this the first time that Bnei, officially I'm saying, because the rabbis will tell us that they actually hear about Shabbat at Mara, okay, as they leave Yam Suf. But anyways, leaving that aside for a moment, is this the first time that Bnei Israel have heard of Shabbat? Or, alternatively, is Moshe reminding them of something that they already know about? And you could argue in both directions. I would prefer to suggest that this is actually something which must be known to the people of Israel, because otherwise the introduction would have been different. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, speak to Bnei Israel, tell them that I have something called Shabbat. I'm giving it to them. They're supposed to observe it. This is what it looks like. And yet, the reference to Shabbat in the story of the man is oblique. It's almost as if the people of Israel might have an inkling of what it's about. So what I would like to suggest is that effectively what is happening as the references in the Torah accumulate is that the idea of Shabbat develops. The first Shabbat is a Shabbat in the life of God. The first Shabbat is an abstract idea. The second Shabbat is a Shabbat which is crystallizing into a human observance. And this is what it looks like. Eit asher tofu efu, ve'eit asher tevashlu bashelu, ve'eit kol ha'odef, hanichu lachem lemishmeret hadaboker. Bake ahead of time, cook ahead of time. Oh, proto-melachot, right? Leave the rest over for tomorrow. So Shabbat begins to acquire some sort of an observance associated with it in a concrete way, in a human way, in a way that it had not existed before this moment. Not that the people of Israel weren't familiar with it, they were, but only as some sort of a cosmic reality, as a story about God's creation, so to speak, but not as a crystallized observance, until now. And effectively, as the references unfold, we will discover that Shabbat becomes more and more anchored as an observance. So we get to Aseret HaDibrot, and it makes it to the list of the top 10, right? And all of a sudden it applies to everybody. Bincha, uvitcha, avdecha, bamatcha, etc., etc. And we get one reference further, and Shabbat becomes some sort of a capital offense if it's not observed. And we get to the Mikoshesh in Parshat Shlach, and we see that played out. Somebody's put to death. That's a way of saying, by the way, Shabbat's really important. Okay? Yes?
Well, for the second reference, was it not to gather or not to bake and cook?
Gathering explicitly, baking and cooking implicitly.
Gotcha.
Okay? All right. But that's basically what we have. Again, if we were actually to go through all the sources and work through all the material, the most we could possibly assemble in terms of melachot, whatever that word means, is under 10. Okay? Now if I were to ask the average person in the room, which has some familiarity, somebody who has some, anyone who sort of has some familiarity with, quote-unquote, the traditional observance of Shabbat, and he would say, okay, so tell me, where did you get this idea of 39 activities from? You would say, speak louder. The service in the temple, okay, the Mishkan, right? The tabernacle. This is like a classic, rabbinic anchor for the idea of Melakha, right? Whatever is done in the Mishkan is Melakha. Okay? So Melakha equals Mishkan. Have people heard of E equals MC squared? Yeah? Any physicists in the room that could really explain what that means? Because to really understand what it, there is one, okay? We don't have to tell us now.
How do we digress to the point where we are in modern days times where it's a novelty for someone to keep Shabbos versus if you didn't keep Shabbos before, you got the death penalty.
Yeah. We'll talk about that, but not yet, okay?
Okay.
So I sort of I want to stick to the topic for a second, or a little more narrow, and if there's time, I'll address that too.
Right.
Okay. All right. So again, what I want people to sort of imagine for a moment is, I can reduce a very complicated and involved idea into a simple equation, right? But unless I really am holding in physics and in relativity and in quantum whatever it is, right, I'm not going to fully understand what that little equation means. It's the same thing as saying forbidden Melakha on Shabbat is equal to the activities of the Mishkan. That's the equation. But the question is, what does it actually mean? What does it imply? How do we get there? What does it indicate? How does it impact on our understanding of the institution? Okay? So the rabbis basically argued that at least some of them, that is the fundamental source. There's a juxtaposition in the Torah. The Torah juxtaposes Shabbat observance with the building of the Mishkan. And it does it twice, actually. Once in Parshat Ki Tisa, Exodus 31, and once in Parshat Vayakhel, Exodus 35. In Parshat Ki Tisa, first we hear about the Mishkan, and then we hear about Shabbat. In Parshat Vayakhel, first we hear about Shabbat, and then we hear about the Mishkan. But it's the same juxtaposition. So therefore the rabbis say, yes, what's the meaning of that? Whatever is needed in order to construct the Mishkan, that becomes the Melakha that's forbidden on Shabbat. Or to put it differently, in more technical terms, build the Mishkan, but don't build it on Shabbat. That's the juxtaposition. Okay, but again, I'm interested in understanding what that means. Okay, so in order to understand what it means, we're going to look on page 3, Exodus 31, and how many people have studied in Chavruta before? Okay, so let me explain what this is going to look like. Okay, for the next few minutes, you're going to work with your Chavruta partner who happens to be the person next to you. Okay, it doesn't matter like who you're sitting next to, that's your Chavruta partner. And I'll tell you what Chavruta is not about. Okay? It's not about parallel reading separately and silently. Chavruta is about reading the text to each other. It's about discussing it as you make your way through. It's about questions that come up, or concerns that you have, or things that you didn't fully understand. Okay? I'm going to ask us to spend a few minutes, 6, 7, okay, reading through Exodus 31 in Chavruta. Okay, because this isn't sort of a skills building session, you don't have to work in Hebrew unless you're proficient in Hebrew. I'm not going to say don't, but the goal is to get through the material and be able to reflect on the contents. Okay? As you make your way through, think about Bezalel and his role in the drama of constructing the Mishkan. Think about the juxtaposition with Shabbat observance, which happens in the second paragraph. And think about if there are any linguistic cues that would tie the material together. Okay? So, who is Bezalel? Right? That's number one, first thing to think about. What does he do? What are his abilities? Okay? I already forgot what the second thing was that you're supposed to think about. The third thing is linguistic cues that tie the material together. Okay? People got it? Okay, so work with your chavrutas now for 5 minutes or so. And it should be noisy in here. You're reading out loud. I did some eavesdropping while you were having chavruta and heard some very interesting insights along the way. And I want to look at this idea of Bezalel a little more closely. And we begin by noting that Bezalel is introduced in an unusual way. I don't know if you noticed it. God speaks to Moshe and he says, Re'ei karati v'shem, behold, I've singled out by name, Bezalel ben Uri ben Hur l'matei Yehuda. Okay, so Bezalel is singled out. And Ramban, the Nachmanides, understands that singling out Bezalel speaks to something unique about his abilities. Okay, as Ramban puts it, if we go back to the story of the enslavement, it's unlikely that the people of Israel or any of them would have been doing the kind of work that Bezalel is now called upon to do, i.e. fine motor skills, artistic design, sort of the creative stuff that he does, the materials that he shapes. So the Ramban says, in all probability, Bezalel did not learn how to do this in the land of Egypt because that wasn't an opportunity available to the Israelites. Okay? So what other possibilities are there to explain his skills? Okay, so we would call that a natural, right? Sometimes you have a natural. They're just born, right, with whatever the ability is. And maybe he's that person. The Ramban says one little problem with that theory, which is, I'm going to paraphrase because he doesn't say it this way, but this is what he's saying. If you take a concert pianist and you put them on a construction site and you say, listen, I want you to work with concrete and bricks and mortar, so what's going to happen? Okay, you're going to lose your dexterity, even if you were a natural, right? You can't sort of be working with materials roughly and coarsely and preserve your fine motor skills. So what's left? Bezalel wasn't educated as an artisan. Bezalel, even if he was a natural, it's not enough to explain his ability. The Ramban says that's karati b'shem. That Bezalel is inspired. It's a divine inspiration of the moment to give this individual the ability to do the work that he has to do. I'd like to explore with you what the work is that Bezalel does. Okay? Any artists in the room? Can always count on Sarah. Any other artists in the room?
Yeah.
Yes? A couple more? Okay, Shoshana, what do you work with?
A number of things. Ceramics, acrylics, starting to do metalworking.
Beautiful. Okay, we'll get back to that. Yes?
Photography and watercolor and oil painting.
Okay, what's your
Say
name?
oil paint?
Renana.
Renana. Okay, photography, watercolor,
And oil paint?
oil paint.
Okay.
Okay, Sarah?
Mostly ceramics and painting.
Ceramics and painting. Okay, beautiful. Yes?
Collage.
Collage. Okay, this is like the largest group of artists that I've met in any crowd. I'll just let you know. I have a theory that smartphones kind of like reduced artistic ability over the last few years or whatever. That's my theory. I don't know if it's true. So it's actually very heartening to hear that there are still artists alive and well in the Jewish community and that they're doing good work. Okay? If we sort of explore for a moment the process that Bezalel employs in order to do his work, it's, I guess, fairly describable, right? The process begins with what? Invariably. Whether it's stone, whether it's wood, whether it's metal, whether it's textile, what do you start with?
The concept.
The concept, the design, okay? And once I get the material, what does the material look like? What's the form that it's in?
Rough.
It's rough, it's raw material, right? And then I go through this process, and there's many steps in the process. There might even be some surprises along the way. And at the end of the process, I'm going to produce a finished product. And the finished product either will have utility, or it will have aesthetic value, or it will have both. Okay, but that's essentially what the process looks like. It always looks the same. Okay, idea, raw material, application of some sort of defined steps, finished product, utility, aesthetic value. That's the process of Bezalel doing his work. Okay? That's another way of saying, in any kind of design moment, in any design process, you need those elements in order for something to emerge from the effort. Okay? You might say, if I were to kind of, make it more generic, there is a mind piece, an intentionality piece, call it a design piece, an abstract piece, and there's a practical piece. I know you can kind of like go the Jackson Pollock route and like toss the paint on the canvas and the rest of it. I don't know how much deliberation there is or intentionality. I don't want to offend anybody. There might be a lot, okay? I don't personally see it. But in a design process in which the finished product clearly demonstrates some sort of utility or aesthetic value, right? then there has to be deliberation and intentionality and mindfulness as the process unfolds. Doesn't mean it's going to go smoothly necessarily. But sort of the intentionality, the mind piece, is intrinsic to being able to get the work done. But without the actualization, you're not going to produce anything. So I guess fundamentally what I'm saying is, whatever B'Tzalel does, it's going to involve something which is conceptual and abstract, nevertheless intentional and deliberate, and something which is practical and concrete, as the design is actualized. Okay, so that's point number one. Raw material to finished product, employing some sort of a process which is intentionally and deliberately applied. Okay? At the same time, B'Tzalel is highly unusual because he works with metal, and he works with wood, and he works with stone, which means precious stones, and he works with textiles. Okay, and all the artists in the room work with materials. Most of you work with a more limited palette. So if I were to ask, let's say, Shoshana, you worked with ceramics and painting, and now I'm going to give you a lump of wool, and I'm going to ask you to please turn it into a beautiful piece of textile. What would you say?
I've tried it. I've failed.
Well, you tried. That's really good, right? In other words, the fact that you had skill with ceramics does not necessarily translate into skill with material, with wool, right? We have a photographer in the room. If I gave you a lump of gold and some, fine engraving tools, and I said, listen, I really want you to make a ring out of this, what would you say?
Go find a jeweler.
Go find a jeweler, right? Because the fact that you have sort of ability with painting or with photography does not necessarily translate into ability with precious material, precious metal. Okay? The nature of the creative processes, it tends to be limited. Or to put it differently, it's rare to find a Renaissance personality that can work with everything. Okay? That has ability with all of the plastic arts. Michelangelo comes to mind. Okay? He was an architect / designer. He was an accomplished carver, mostly stone, but occasionally wood. He did one bronze, which was actually melted down for cannon fodder in one of those Florentine wars. Maybe that means it wasn't a very good bronze, I don't really know. Okay? But he had a very reasonable range, but he didn't do any weaving. Okay? And most, even if, the Renaissance quote-unquote artists that you come across that work with a range of materials, they probably do not have the range of B'Tzalel. Or to put it differently, says the Ramban, Re'eh karati b'shem. That's what it means to be called by name. That's what it means to be inspired. This is an individual who has an unusual resume that makes him unusually suitable for the task at hand. I'll take questions at the end, okay? So that's B'Tzalel. An incredible range. Whatever you put in front of him, he can work with, and he will always follow the protocol. Intentionality, deliberation, as the design idea is actualized through the exercise of practical skill. Am I telling you anything that you don't know? It's right there in the text. Okay? So I want to look at the text a little more carefully. Re'eh karati b'shem. I'm going to read it in Hebrew. Behold, I call by name. I'm in verse number 2 at the top of the sheet. B'Tzalel ben Uri ben Hur l'matei Yehuda. B'Tzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Yehuda. Va'amalei oto ruach Elokim. I filled him with the Spirit of God, b'chokhmah, b'tfuna, u'v'da'at, u'v'chol melakha. Lachshov machshavot, la'asot b'zahav, u'v'kesef, u'v'nachosh, u'v'choroshet even namalot, u'v'choroshet etz, la'asot, b'chol melakha. So I don't know if you noticed that. I sort of read it emphatically. I hope you noticed, right? Each one of these verses focused on a different aspect of B'Tzalel's uniqueness. Va'amalei oto ruach Elokim b'chokhmah b'tfuna u'v'da'at. Any Chabadniks in the room? Chokhmah, bina, da'at. Chokhmah, tivuna, da'at. It's basically the same thing. right? But all of these things, call it knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, pertain to what? The mind, the idea, the design, the inspiration. I filled him with inspiration which expresses itself intellectually. Chokhmah, tivuna, and da'at. There is an aspect of his work which is mind-based. What are the final two words of the verse? B'chokhmah, b'tivuna, u'v'da'at, u'v'chol melakha. Lachshav machshavot, which, by the way, doesn't mean to think thoughts. It means to design designs, especially textile work. Right? In the Mishkan narratives, machshavot or lachshov refers to the weaving. Because you got to think ahead before you try that one. Especially embroidery work. Imagine if you just like wing it when you're embroidering. It's not going to come out on both sides the way it's supposed to. Especially if it's double-sided, which the curtains are. Okay? So, lachshov machshavot la'asot b'zahav u'va'kesef u'va'nachoshet u'va'charoshet eben l'malot u'va'charoshet etz. Final three words. La'asot b'chol melakha. Okay, so what does that indicate? I would argue what it provides us with is the fundamental definition of what melakha is. You want to know what melakha is? I'll tell you. Melakha involves two components, and each one of them is essential. The first component pertains to the mind. Chokhmah, tivuna, and da'at. I.e., that which is intentional, that which is deliberate, that which is intellectual, that which is conceptual and abstract, whatever you want to call it, it's what we think and how we think about it. When we talk about the practical skill, lachshov machshavot la'asot b'zahav u'va'kesef u'va'nachoshet u'va'charoshet eben l'malot u'va'charoshet etz. How does the verse of practical skill conclude? La'asot b'chol melakha. It's melakha once again with a la'asot involved because it's doing. It's practical. I.e., there is no such thing as melakha unless it involves two components. Number one, intentionality. Number two, transformation of matter. Without those two components, it is not melakha by definition. Okay, so you can think all you want about turning on the lights. It's not melakha. You can turn on the light accidentally. It's not melakha. It has to involve both components. I'm talking about the halachic definition now. But the halachic definition emerges organically from the story of Bezalel. We haven't yet made the Shabbat connection. But right now, the issue is defining what Bezalel does. What Bezalel does is melakha. That's the essence of his work. What is melakha? That is it. The mind and the actualization of the mind. The transformation of the matter that comes with it. Okay? All right. Let's go one step further. If I were to ask you, great, let's kind of think about Bezalel for a moment. In the drama of constructing the Mishkan, what does he represent as an archetype? What does he represent? If this were a mythology, what would Bezalel be? As an idea, as a symbol, what does he represent? Yeah.
Creator.
Say again?
A creator.
He's a creator. That's exactly right. He's a creator with a small c. There's also a creator with a big C. Right? That's a different kind of creation. Right? Creator with a big C does something that no human being can do, at least according to our tradition, which is called Bria. Bria means, according to the Ramban, ex nihilo, yesh me'ayin. To create matter out of nothing. Right? the Big Bang out of like some super dense plasma the size of a grapefruit, whatever it was. And the step before that too. That's a divine ability to be a creator with a big C. Yesh Mi'ayin. So B'Tzalel is not that. He's the creator with a little c. What does the creator with a little c do? Works with material, applies his mind, and transforms it to give it shape and meaning and beauty and utility. That's what B'Tzalel does. Which is another way of saying, it should be obvious, but maybe it's not, that his name has nothing to do with onions. Right? That's a joke. Right? How do you say an onion in Hebrew? Batzal, right?
Yeah.
B'Tzalel is not about onions. It's not the onions of God. Okay? What does B'Tzalel mean? B'Tzal El. This is an individual that, as it were, labors in God's shadow. Or maybe he is God's shadow. Okay? So that sort of sets up this dynamic where this individual is taking on some sort of a role which reminds us of God, the Creator. Va'amalei oto ruach Elokim. That's a very charged phrase, by the way. 2 other places in the Torah where it occurs. Okay, I'll tell you the one that I'm not thinking about. The story of Yosef. Right? Hanimtza kazeh ish asher ruach Elokim bo, says Paro in admiration. Such a brilliant guy who could interpret my dream. That's one place. The other place in the Torah where the phrase occurs, only other place, and that's the one that I think is pertinent to our discussion, is V'ha'aretz ha'ta tohu v'bohu v'choshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. What is Ruach Elohim in the original story? The moment before the creative energy bursts forth. It's that pregnant moment. Chaos, but potential, right? Mass, energy, sort of like, whatever the physicists would describe it as. I guess energy before the mass. Or the plasma before the energy, whatever it is. V'ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamayim v'yomer Elokim hiyor. And the drama of creation begins to unfold. Which is another way of saying, when the Torah tells us that B'Tzalel is inspired with Ruach Elokim, it's not just saying he's a smart guy. It's indicating this is a man that will be doing God's work. But what is God's work? God's work is the work of creation. Taking matter and transforming it through the application of his mind. That's B'Tzalel. Okay, so far what we have, when we look at it more closely, is an idea of a human being that's doing creative work. What I mean by creative work is the work of the creator, or work as a creator, the transformation of material, the actualization of intention, and in so doing is effectively following in the footsteps of his creator. I.e., what God does in Maseh Bereshit is what B'Tzalel will do in the Mishkan, just in miniature. Okay? Melakha seems to be a pretty important term in the discussion. I'm going to claim it is the term in the discussion. Melakha is the term from which the mountain hangs. It is the hair on which the mountain is suspended. The word melakha. What does it actually mean? What's the root of the word? Hmm? Lo shamati.
Melech?
There's an aleph in it though. Is there not?
Yes.
Malach. That's curious. Malach, melakha. There's many synonyms in Hebrew for the word work. Right? You've got avodah, that's a very popular one. You have pe'ula. If you really want to be literary, you have alilah. In modern Hebrew, it means like the plot of the novel or whatever is called the alilah. But in biblical Hebrew, it means like activity. You have amal, which is more toilsome. There's lots of good synonyms for the word work. And yet, when we talk about the Mishkan, there's only one word which is used consistently. And that's the word Melakha. So that leads me to believe that whatever B'Tzalel is doing, it's different than Avodah, Pe'ula, Alilah, and Amal. And it is. Who does Avodah? If a malach is somehow associated with Melakha, who does Avodah? An Eved. What's an Eved mean? Slave. A servant is kind of a nice translation. It means a slave, that's what an Eved is. Okay? Bear in mind, by the way, when we talk about the narratives of the enslavement in Egypt, the word that's consistently employed is avodah. The beginning of Sefer Shemot. Vaya'avidu Mitzrayim et bnei Yisrael befarech, vayimararu et chayehem ba'avodah kasha, b'chomer uvilvenim, uv'chol avodah basadeh, et kol avodatam, asher avdu vahem befarech. The people of Israel in the land of Egypt never do Melakha. Because Melakha is refined. Melakha is higher skills. They do Avodah. And Avodah is back-breaking toil. The difference between Melakha and Avodah is that Avodah is done by an Eved. And Melakha is associated with Malach. What I mean by that is, Melakha speaks to our higher capacity as human beings. Or to put it differently, Melakha pertains to what human beings do when they transform matter in the process of realizing a creative idea. Okay? In other words, Melakha is what makes us unique as human beings. The capacity to perform Melakha. Only human beings can perform Melakha because it is a God-given ability. Right? You know, the medievals kind of like wondered, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? B'Tselem Elokim Asa'oto. Right? Oh, maybe it means our intelligence. It does. And maybe it means our ability to use language, even to describe abstract things. It does. And maybe it means our moral will, the ability to choose. It does. That's all true. When we talk about the material world, what it means is to be able to execute melakha. That's a uniquely human capacity. Or to put it differently, anything can do avodah. An animal can do avodah. All you have to do is load it up. The avodah will get done. I might say, if I were sort of connecting the dots here, the injustice of slavery is that it reduces human beings to animals. That's what it means to be an Eved. It means to do avodah. Avodah is not a human capacity. Any creature can do avodah. Let's translate that into a more halachic discussion. Okay, we'll see the list shortly, but I'll just sort of like anticipate it a little bit. If I want to spend my Shabbat, we live on the 3rd floor, no elevator, 51 stairs, but who's counting? I'm counting every time I come back from the supermarket.
Good workout.
Okay? 1/3 of the way there, 2/3 of the way there, whatever. Okay, that's my issue. If I want to spend Shabbat carrying my couch up and down the stairs all day long, it's not a recommended way to spend Shabbat. But I didn't violate Melakha. No violation took place. In spite of the fact that I'm sweating and I'm exhausted and I'm collapsing from the labor, I didn't do Melakha.
But you're carrying.
I'm within my particular private space, let's say. Okay? I'm saying the physical exertion associated with carrying the couch up and down the stairs all day long will never be a violation of Melakha. Why? Because the animal could do it just as well. But I strike a match, which is effortless. And that's on the list as Melakha. Okay, which teaches us two things. The first thing it teaches us is Melakha has nothing to do with physical exertion. And number two, Melakha has everything to do with the creative capacity that human beings have. And that's the work that Bezalel will do in the creation of the Mishkan. And that is why he is described as possessing ability which is applied across all of the materials one could imagine. And that is why his name is Bezalel ben Uri. Because he works with the image of God. And he basks in the light that illuminates everything that he works with. We get to the reference of the Shabbat. And what do we discover? In that same page, on page 31. Ooh, a few more minutes, okay? Everyone okay? Yeah? I often go over time at Pardes. Sometimes I get in trouble. But I'm not in a rush. I mean, we got time, right? We don't really, but I'll be finished soon. Okay. When we talk about Shabbat, I'm not going to read through it now, okay? If you were to examine every single reference to Shabbat and Yom Tov in the Torah, the vocabulary that would be invariably used is Melakha. Okay, sometimes Melechet Avodah, that's true, but never Avodah by itself. Okay? In fact, if you do the math, you will discover there's roughly 60 references to Melakha and its variations in the Torah. Okay? Half of those references are in the context of the Mishkan, and half of those references are in the context of Shabbat. What does that tell you? The rabbis know what they're talking about. The idea of Mishkan and the idea of Shabbat really are intrinsically connected. Because both of them are focusing our attention on the capacity of the human being to execute Melakha. And the definition of Melakha is derived, ultimately, from the archetype of Bezalel, who does Melakha in the process of constructing the Mishkan. Let's have a quick look at the list, the master list. 39 activities. Like I said, if you did your homework and you looked throughout the references in the Hebrew Bible to Shabbat, Yom Tov, whatever, you could not generate all of these. It's not possible. Okay? You could generate 8 or 9 or 10. And yet there's 39 things on the list. So quickly look through the list. Okay, I'm going to ask people, if we were to break down the list into some smaller units, what would those units be? What would my first unit of Melachot be about?
Agriculture.
Agriculture. What does agriculture mean?
Planting.
Okay, so basically, growing your own food, that's agriculture, right? I start with, obviously, plowing, and I end with a loaf of bread. And the rabbis call this Sidura de Pat, sort of the order of making bread. Right? We would call it agriculture. That's pretty much what these first 11 activities are associated with. And we think, yeah, what's the big deal? You just buy a loaf of bread. Isn't that easy? I mean, it is easy for us. Okay? But if you sort of imagine the process that took place in order to take that bread out of the earth, so to speak, it's absolutely amazing. Hamatzi lechem min haaretz. Right? Literally, that's what happened. But there's many steps in between. That's the first category. Basically, agriculture in one word. Second category. Textiles. Okay? Textiles derived, in this case, from animal fibers. But maybe it doesn't really matter, right? What does textile production look like? Again, we sort of take it for granted. You just whatever, go buy a shirt. Big deal. Have you ever look closely at that fiber? No, my goodness, look at that. There's all these little threads in there, right? The word woof is a real word in English, by the way. Warp and woof. Woof, woof, right? Weft, woof, whatever, it's the same word, right? Not to get into all the details. Basically, the warp threads run horizontally. Or is it the other way around? I think that's right, though. And the weft threads run vertically, and voila, you've created textile. That's astounding. Okay, that's the second category. Creating materials. The third category. Oh, there's a little line over there. That helps. Yes, what's the third category? Yes?
Writing.
No, that's the fourth. What's the third?
Oh.
I'm looking at number 24 to 31, right?
Leather.
Animal husbandry.
Oh, yes. What an interesting word, husbandry. Yeah, working with animals, okay? So basically, that's a third category. Animals and animal products, particularly hides. Okay? That's the third category. Fourth category, like you already pointed out, is writing and its analog, which is erasing. Next category, building and its analog, demolishing. Next category, fire and its analog, extinguishing. Those three melachot each have the opposite, right, which is also melakha. Not to get into the discussion now, I mean, in order for the analog to be a melakha, it has to be done with creative intent. I.e., just erasing is not melakha. Only if I erase with the intent of writing in its place, it's melakha. Just demolishing is not melakha. Only if I demolish with intent to build, to construct, is it melakha, etc. Okay? Kol ha-mekalkalim keturin is sort of the halachic phrase that describes that condition. If it's simply a destructive act, it can't be melakha by definition. It comes back to our earlier discussion. Melakha is by its very nature constructive and creative, never destructive. Okay? Then we have final hammer blow, whatever that means, and carrying, right, which is number 39. The rabbis called carrying melakha giru'ah, which means it's a little different than the others. Okay? We'll explore why momentarily. Okay? If I were to ask us to look at this list now, this is going to be impossible, okay? But pretend for a second that you're not Jewish. Okay? And look at the list and tell me what the list is about. What's this a list of? That's what I'm asking. Yes?
So I would say with a couple exceptions, transformation of matter.
Transformation of matter, good.
But then that does leave with a question I had, where is how is carrying a transformation
Yes,
of matter?
good. Excellent
And then
question.
if demolishing, even without the intention to build, is still a transformation.
Yes, good. So a couple of things don't fit, but you got most of them. Okay? You could say most of them seem to involve transformation of matter. That's true. Anything else? Any anthropologists in the room? We need an anthropologist. We had some artists, no anthropologists?
Civilization.
Okay, civilization, right? Certainly that's part of it. What is typically involved with crafting civilization? Right? And that might explain, by the way, the final hammer blow as well, which sounds like, division of labor and stratification and production of, products and the rest of it. Okay? Any other?
Well, the elements of ancient economic activity.
Economic activity, maybe that would cover the carrying thing as well. Okay? Okay, you're all right. I'm not going to disagree with anything that anyone said. I'm going to use a slightly different formulation. I'm going to say what we have on this list is every revolution in human history. Every revolution in human history is on this list. Whether that means the invention of agriculture, which transformed our existence as human beings. Because we used to be migratory, like all the other animals. And somehow we mastered the ability to grow food, which transformed our existence. Okay? And then we created clothing, which allowed us to live in environments that we couldn't previously inhabit. Right? And we learned to use other creatures in a way that other creatures can't use other creatures. Okay? And we go down the list, and consistently that is the theme. Writing is one of the greatest revolutions in human history. Because it allows us to transmit knowledge down the generations, across the world. That's only possible with writing. Okay, building is something that human beings excel at. The variety of things that we build and the environments in which we build them is unparalleled. Fire is one of the greatest inventions of humanity. How many things are we able to do because we mastered it? And no other creature did. Today we would call it electricity, but it's the same thing, so to speak. In other words, this is a list that speaks to what makes us unique as human beings. I know that a spider spins a web, and the fibers of the web are more strong than steel. It's all true. But guess what? That's all a spider can spin. Okay, spider cannot construct anything but a web. And a leafcutter ant can't grow anything but mushrooms. Etc., etc., etc. It's not that other creatures can't engage in activities which resemble Melakha. It's that the human being occupies a unique position that is absolutely unparalleled. And if you want to know what it is to be human in transforming the world, the list is right here. That is everything. There is nothing else. Carrying is a uniquely human activity, right? Carrying sounds kind of arcane, but if I say Amazon, you understand what I'm talking about. Okay? The obsession with things and the collection of them. Anyone have a pet at home? Like, does your pet have a collection of things? If it does, it's a small collection. It's probably nothing like yours, right? Because animals don't do that for some strange reason. Human beings amass and amass and amass and amass. Sometimes it's problematic. I'm not even talking about, like, hoarders.org or whatever it's called. It's going to clear out your house. I'm just talking about the pursuit of objects and the transfer of those objects from one domain to another, from one ownership to another, from one space to another. That's a uniquely human pursuit. So really, the list of Melakha pertains to human creativity being actualized in transforming matter. Melachot describe what it is that human beings can do that no other creature can. Which of course begs the question, the million-dollar question. If Melakha is about what makes us uniquely human and our ability to transform the world, then why should Shabbat be about curtailing Melakha? Why shouldn't it be about celebrating Melakha? We can have a Melakha party. Hey, I'll light matches and you'll use your hammer and someone else is going to write a poem and we'll have a Melakha party. Wouldn't that be a wonderful way to celebrate the unique capacity of the human being? Why is the essence of Shabbat the curtailment of this power? And I think I just answered my own question. Okay, yes, go ahead.
So I guess you could ask the other way too. If Shabbat is about moving away from human revolutions, etc., then could you argue that, then shouldn't we just go live out in the field on Shabbat and not use our refrigerators or climb stairs?
Right.
That's
Luddites, right? So I don't think it's about that actually.
Yeah, I don't think it's about that. Yeah, I'm trying to
Okay.
understand.
What I would say is the following. If I were to ask you, this is a tough question, okay? What is the greatest invention in human history? We probably have different answers, okay? I'm going to share my answer. You may agree, you may disagree. I would say the greatest invention in human history is the hydrogen bomb. Why? Because we took the power of the sun and we harnessed it. You take hydrogen and you fuse it together and it creates so much energy, explosive energy. Effectively what you're doing literally is harnessing the power of the sun.
But you're destroying in the process.
That's exactly the point. Human beings have the power that no other creature has. We really are in the shadow of God. Which is another way of saying, if we're not prepared to recognize limits in our power, if we're not prepared to wield our power responsibly, we will destroy the world. In fact, we are destroying the world. That's no longer the subject of science fiction. We are destroying the world. Okay? And, we make our gestures, which are important, recycling, and, all the other stuff. And I'm not going to belittle it because every little bit counts. But there's a lot of big stuff that we're doing that's having a huge impact in a very destructive way. So I have 5 kids, Kanina, which means I watched a lot of National Geographic videos over the years. And in one of those videos, the following proposition was presented. I didn't actually do a fact check, but I'm going to trust them on this. Besides human beings, what is the other creature that most transforms nature? That's a pretty good guess. Termites. That's not what they said, though. Not worms. Not bees. Beavers. Because beavers build a dam, and the dam diverts the water. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little secret which National Geographic did not share. Okay? The beavers can build dams from now until the end of time. It will not destroy the world. There is nothing that any other creature on this planet can do that will ever destroy the world. The only creature with the capacity to destroy the world is us. That's what Shabbat is about. Recognize that we labor in the shadow of God. Recognize that we are creators with a small c. Because of our unique and unparalleled power, we have to recognize limits. And if we can recognize limits, then what we create is the hydrogen bomb. It's that simple. Shabbat is the invitation to recognize our ability, our capacity, our divinity, and to take a step back from the edge. Not because Melakha is bad, but because we're so powerful. And because we're so powerful, if we fail to recognize, and this is where the things begin to interlock, the essence of Shabbat is to recognize God as the creator. But what that really means, recognition of God as the creator, is to recognize my limits as a human being. That's what that implies. In another context, we would have called it Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. It's the same idea. The acceptance of the yoke of heaven, what does that ultimately mean? That I am subject to a higher law. And that ultimately, ironically, counterintuitively, whatever you want to call it, only by recognizing that higher law can I actually create in a way that's going to make the world a better place. Okay, it's late.
The guy with one breath is the ultimate destroyer.
The guy with?
I said God with one breath
yeah.
is the ultimate destroyer.
Right, but it's been a while since that one, right? Post-Mabul, God sort of doesn't do that anymore. It's in our hands now.
Okay.
And we'll make that decision. Right, so Shabbat is really the opportunity to make the best possible decision we can make. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Those Pardes sheets hopefully went around. If you're interested, you can sign up. And please just make sure they get back to me so I can take them home. And thank you very much.